Hello, Tom Maguire. So I've got a really good book to talk about today to just give a bit of a review on. It's the Almanack of Naval Ravikant. So if you're not familiar with Naval Ravikant, he's done a few different books that are worth having a look. He's got lots of material online. He's definitely someone who is worth having a look out for. This is basically a collection of his sort of wisdom and experience from the last 10 years put together by someone called Eric Jorgenson, and it's got a foreword by Ferris as well. So Tim Ferris is definitely someone else I recommend kind of having a look at. He's got loads of material out there as well on YouTube. So lots of really good free material from these people. This book actually you can download as a PDF for free, as an ebook, which I think is fantastic. That doesn't cheapen it for me at all. I listened to it on Audible. I actually paid to have it also on my Kindle, so it's on there as well. And at some point, I probably will treat myself to a hardback version of it as well, because I really like it, and it's a sort of book that I would like to just sort of have on my shelf so I can kind of refer back to here and there, because I think there's some really good stuff in there. It's not anything fantastically written, it's not anything kind of massively original particularly, but it just has some really good wisdom in there put in a really nice way, and I highly recommend it basically. So if you don't want to listen to any more of this review, then basically go out and get it. I think it's really good. There's also a fantastic book list in there as well, which I'm really grateful for. There's a book list towards the end, and that's already inspired me to read a few other books. I'm already reading Reality Is Not What It Seems by Carlo Rovelli, which is highly recommended by him. There's a few others in there. The Tao of Seneca as well is another one that I've been meaning to read for quite some time, so I'm gonna listen to that now, because he says the audiobook is absolutely fantastic, so I'm going to give that a go. And there's a few more on there that I hadn't heard of as well, which is really nice to see. So if you're someone who's into personal development, obviously this channel is about reading and personal development, and if you're really into personal development, you're passionate about it, this is one of those books that's just a real pleasure. It's a real treat, basically. For me, it just kind of links different fantastic books together, different bits of advice and wisdom, ancient and more modern as well, and I really like that. I personally find that I kind of put this guy, Naval Ravikant, in with sort of Tim Ferris, who's the guy that did Black Swan, Nassim Nicholas Taleb as well. I kind of put them together. They've almost got this slightly kind of arrogant edge to them, but I kind of quite like it. And when I say arrogant, I don't necessarily mean that, but they just seem to have a bit of an edge of quite, they're successful types. They know their stuff. It's almost like they're a bit of a gang kind of thing. You can imagine them kind of talking and sharing ideas, and they're just very successful and very efficient. And I think that that's good, isn't it? It is what it is. So they have their own unique style, I suppose, is what I'm saying. I definitely get that impression from Naval as well. He has his own very unique style, which is what makes this book even better as far as I'm concerned. So I'm just going to touch on some of the things that he mentions, because this is a personal development channel. I read as much as possible to develop myself, and then to try and give as much. And then I want to try and give back the best from the world of personal development that I possibly can. From non-fiction, from fiction as well, from any good book I read. I want to try and give the best advice I can. I want my kids to look at these reviews and no doubt laugh at me, but also to take hopefully some wisdom from it and some motivation to read and develop as well, hopefully. So my book reviews, as I've always said, are always very honest in that respect. I've got no reason to lie to you whatsoever. I'm quite happy to tell the truth if I don't think anything is very good, and this book is certainly very good. He talks a little bit about avoiding a relative mindset. So he talks about how those sort of people who attack wealth creation, they're actually just trying to be kind of superior in their own sort of way. They're basically playing a status game, and I completely understand that. I know people who play this status game myself. They're the sort of people who say, oh, that person's got far too much money, they obviously came by it, dishonestly, they're avoiding tax, they've inherited something, they're sneaky, what have you, they've shat on someone to get there, they've stood on someone to climb that ladder, or what have you. And they're basically trying to position themselves and trying to sort of say, that's not me, I'm someone who just works hard, I don't get paid as much as I should do, I've studied very hard, I'm not a money person, I'm not that materialistic, so I don't go after money. So they're trying to sort of virtue signal in a way that they're kind of better than these people, when actually it just boils down to jealousy and envy. And I see that so much, in some people, unfortunately, I see it in people who are close to me, but not too many people who are close to me, fortunately. But I see it a lot in my business as well. when you work for yourself and you charge a reasonable amount of money for your time, you get very used to the different types of people. Those who are happy to pay you whatever you ask because they value what you do, and they'll, if you stop doing what you should be doing, then they'll stop paying you. But they're quite happy to not even question it, and you get that sense from them. And then there are those who before you even give them a quote, they're going to think, that's far more than I get paid. That's kind of, I'm not sure that's reasonable. I think you're being a bit greedy there. And they just have this sort of mindset, this comparative sort of relative mindset where they don't really understand money necessarily. They don't respect money. They don't really respect themselves in some ways. And it kind of shows in their response, in their body language. So I really appreciated him talking about that. That was really relevant as far as I'm concerned. It's so much nicer to sort of deal with people who just, no problem. That's the service you're providing. That's how much you charge. No problem. Fine. We'll go from there. You sense it. You really do. And he talks about that. You pick up on that. You pick up on when people are happy with that or not. And he talks about how we should up our hourly rate. We should value our time. We should pick an hourly rate and then go higher with that. And sort of mentions the fact that we might regret it otherwise. We need to value our time. And I've talked about that before from different books. And I think that's really important. He says that even a failed entrepreneur has the skill set to make it on their own, which I think is really important. He says he'd rather be a failed entrepreneur than someone who's not even tried it and has been successful in other areas. And I completely agree with that. I think being entrepreneurial is massively important. It's something I always strive for. I'm perhaps maybe not as entrepreneurial as I would like to be. That's something that I try and develop in myself. I think if you ask kind of family members, they would say that I'm quite entrepreneurial, and friends potentially would say that. But I suppose I can compare myself to other people who are hugely entrepreneurial, and I sort of see that as something that I can work towards and progress with. And I do see it as something that kind of buys you freedom to a certain extent. I think if you've got the mindset that you can pick up something and run with it, and make the most of something, solve problems, develop businesses, make money, that gives you a real confidence and feeling of freedom. You're not reliant on the man to pay you, or you're not reliant to go and get a job that you might resent or not enjoy. That's a real sense of well-being and freedom there. And as we've talked about before, when it comes to well-being, having a sense of control over your work is a big part of well-being. It certainly is for me. He talks about Richard Feynman, who I've talked about before. I've reviewed one of his books before. Off the top of my head, I can't remember which one it was now. It wasn't Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. It was... can't remember off the top of my head. I'll edit it in afterwards, but he's fantastic. I've got a lot of time for him. And Naval mentions him and says how he's quite a big influence as well, which I liked. He's done a lecture called 6 Easy Pieces, and then another one called 6 Not So Easy Pieces. The first one being about more simple kind of physics type things that aren't necessarily that simple, but he manages to sort of explain them in his own really unique, straightforward way, which is really good. The second one, 6 Not So Easy Pieces, is about Einstein and some of the more complicated fields of physics that, again, he manages to explain really well. So I fancy reading that at some point. He talks about how important it is that we understand things like game theory and supply and demand. And if we have a good understanding of maths, we don't necessarily have to go into great depths with maths, but things like statistics, percentages, arithmetic are really useful if you want to be successful in business. And I thought that was quite a simple point, but one worth thinking about and remembering. He says that we should lean into short-term pain with the idea of long-term gain, which is, again, it sounds a little bit obvious, but sometimes it's just nice to hear it from a different perspective. Identify the great books for you, then really absorb them. So I'm someone who's guilty of getting through a lot of books. I tend to go through close to 100 a year, somewhere between 80 and 100. And sometimes I will read some of those a bit too quickly or listen to them a bit too quickly and not necessarily take them in as much as I should. I think that is quite natural that we do that. I think it's very difficult to expect us to take everything in. They say that if you come away with one useful point from a book, then that's been worth it. And I think that's true, but I think it's really good once you find a good book to go over it again, absorb it properly and think about it properly. And that's another reason I do these reviews, is so I can talk about the books and think about them and crystallise that knowledge in my mind a little bit more and have something to refer back to a little bit as well. So yeah, he talks about finding those kind of, I suppose, 100 books that are really important to you and really significant, and then properly rereading them and absorbing them properly. And I think that's fantastic advice. That's something I intend to do I think when I'm probably a few more years into my personal development sort of reading journey, I will probably do that a bit more. I will find maybe a top 100 that have been really significant, and I'll go over them again and really try to sort of master them, I suppose. I think that could be really beneficial. He also says, on the other hand, though, that there's no rubbish out there. If you're someone who isn't into reading, develop a love for reading, just read anything, whatever it is, romantic novels or whatever it is. He says there is no rubbish, which kind of goes a little bit against that argument to a certain extent, but I think he's right. I agree. I think reading for reading's sake is really important, and he kind of acknowledges that. I think, just the exercise of reading is good for you. I think it's stimulating. It sparks your imagination. And who's to say what's rubbish anyway and what isn't? He says that in his reading list that he hasn't included everything in there because there are some books he might be a bit embarrassed about and things like that, which I thought was a bit of a shame. I think, why not just own it? Who cares, basically? I read rubbish stuff as well. I read Jeremy Clarkson and stuff like that, talking about cars and things. I actually think he's quite a good writer, to be fair. But it's not exactly highbrow stuff, but so what? Who cares? If you're confident and good at what you do, then just read what you want to read. There's nothing wrong with just enjoying reading. But he makes that point, and I appreciate that. I think that's good. He says to read Microeconomics as a solid foundation as well, and he's a couple of books on there that he's recommended, which I will be looking at. He says that if you believe happiness is a choice, you can start to work on it, and I think that's really, really important. I've been coaching people recently around stress management, a senior management team over Zoom, and I've been trying to get them to take personal responsibility because so many of them just see it as an ongoing problem at work. They've just been recently taken over. They've had lack of support. They've got new management in place. They've got me brought in, without any kind of choice for them particularly to train them. And I'm just trying to sort of say to them that none of this stuff works until you take responsibility for your own mind and for your own development and change. And actually you can choose the way you feel to a certain extent. It takes work, it takes practice, and it takes time. It won't happen overnight, but you can choose to develop yourself and exercise that mental muscle. So I really like that. He talks about the Buddhist idea that every desire is a chosen unhappiness. And I know I do that myself sometimes. I'll see a car or start fantasizing about a car that I fancy and I haven't got it yet and things, and it just makes you unhappy. In some ways it makes you happy if you look at it in a positive way and think that that's something to strive for and to look forward to. But overall, for me, it just makes me unhappy, really, because I just sort of think it takes me out of the moment and it stops me for being sort of grateful for what I have. And actually, when I think about it, I'm extremely grateful for what I have. These things, I know that if I had that car, potentially, that it wouldn't be long before I was bored of it and I wanted the next thing. So it's really quite illogical in lots of ways, and we can take control of that, and I think it's important we do. He mentions the Tim Ferris Wim Hof podcast, which I haven't listened to yet, although I have heard a bit from Tim Hof, and I think he's Tim Hof? Tim Hof. And I think he's fantastic. So all the breathing techniques and the cold water therapy stuff, I think that's really good. He makes the point that we should just try to sit for an hour and do nothing and don't even try to meditate, and that's an important type of meditation in itself. He says, how often do we actually sit and do nothing? Just allow your thoughts to happen and just don't worry about it. Just sit and do nothing. And I think that is probably one of the best bits of advice in the book, actually, in some ways, because we beat ourselves up around meditating and clearing our mind, and we tell ourselves that it's okay to run with it and kind of step outside of ourselves and observe ourselves and things. But actually, to sit and do nothing, in some ways, is really easy. In some ways, it's really difficult. But if you can do it, it's a simple thing to do, isn't it? If you can just make the time to sit for a while, and he says to do an hour every day for however many days, which I think is quite unrealistic for most people to begin with, but you can certainly aspire to get there. But I think that's really good advice. He mentions Krishnamurti, who is someone I hadn't heard of before, and apparently Krishnamurti talks about this idea of being in an internal state of revolution. So you should always be internally ready to change, to become someone different. Jordan Peterson talks about this, talking about allowing the dead wood to burn off and to become a new person. Swallow our pride, don't be too proud of who we are, so that we resist becoming new and letting go of certain things. And that's something I try to practice as well. And it isn't that easy to do. It takes a bit of thinking and a bit of mindfulness to do that. And it's quite frightening as well, I think, in a strange sort of way. But yeah, there's loads of good ideas in this book. I really, really enjoyed it. I'd highly recommend it. It's free as a PDF. It's cheap on Kindle. I think it cost me about £2 on Kindle. The hardback, I'm sure, is really nice. I will buy that at some point, I think, because I think when I've got so much out of a book, I feel I'm quite happy to spend a bit of money on it. I think it's almost a bit of gratitude and thankfulness to do that. So please keep liking, please keep subscribing, and I will do another review very soon. Cheers.